Today is Monday, February 2nd, 2026. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Another round of names hit the headlines in the latest Epstein file news. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can email us as well, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. That's our email address, and we're so glad you're here with us, getting through the news of the day bright and early each and every weekday morning here on the Quick Start Podcast. A lot to get to, as always, on the focus story. Jesus' name was praised at the Grammys, of all places. Details on that coming up in just a moment on the focus story. On the main thing, President Trump floats a 100% tariff threat on Canada over an EV deal with China. Gordon Chang says it's about more than just trade. It's about who's listening when you turn the key. CBN's Gary Lane has more coming up on the main thing. There's also been more disturbing news coming out of Nigeria, more viral reports of 150 Christians being kidnapped or taken into hostage situations here, and this is the latest round of Christian persecution that we need to be praying about, and that is why we have partnered with Christian Solidarity International here on the Quick Start Podcast, because not only do we need to be praying for, as our first line of defense, for our brothers and sisters in Christ around the globe who are being persecuted, but this is a way you can tangibly help, because CSI is on the ground in some of the toughest places in the world, like Iran, like Nigeria, parts of Asia where believers are being targeted by extremist groups and oppressive regimes. And they're there on the ground building relationships. They're not just dropping supplies and going. They are walking alongside pastors and Christians who are in these areas, in these tough spots, and they are providing support, material needs, prayer needs, ongoing support for these persecuted Christians in these tough areas. So CSI is doing the work on the ground, and when you support CSI, you are standing with persecuted Christians and helping them survive and continue to boldly live out their faith. If you're feeling called to get involved and to help in this way, you can get involved at csi-usa.org. That's csi-usa.org. And we're going to go to the news in 90 seconds now. And the Justice Department has dumped millions of pages tied to its investigation of convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, igniting more viral headlines and a fresh wave of speculation. The newly released docs include emails, messages, contact lists, many referencing high-profile figures in politics and other areas. One widely shared claim involves Bill Gates. A draft message attributed to Epstein alleges Gates contracted a sexually transmitted disease. Gates representatives flatly deny the claim, calling it false. Other documents show email exchanges between Epstein or his longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, and public figures. Film executive and New York Giants co-owner Steve Tisch acknowledged exchanging emails discussing, quote, adult women, but says he never visited Epstein's island or accepted invitations. Another name surfacing, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's mother, filmmaker Mira Nair. The email claims she attended an after-party at Maxwell's home for her film, Amelia. And at least 6 people were killed and more than a dozen injured after 2 explosions hit Iran over the weekend. Iranian officials quickly denied any foreign military strike, and now President Trump said just yesterday that Iran is seriously talking to us, signaling a potential diplomatic shift after years of escalation and brinksmanship. And we're going to go right on to the focus story now. And at the Grammys, it was packed with all these speakers. As you can imagine, a lot of profanity, a lot of political virtue signaling. But one voice cut through all of that noise and lifted up the name of Jesus. While other performers were dropping expletives, they were mocking political opponents. A lot of people were bringing out anti-ICE pins and things of that nature and criticizing President Trump. claiming he went to the Epstein Island, which Trump threatened to sue and said that he is thinking about doing that on Trevor Noah because of that claim. But Jelly Roll did something radically different. He praised Jesus plainly and boldly without apology. Here is a clip of that.
First of all, Jesus, I hear you and I'm listening, Lord. I am listening, Lord. Second of all, I want to thank my beautiful wife. I would have never changed my life without you. I'd have ended up dead or in jail. I'd have killed myself if it wasn't for you and Jesus. I thank you for that. I thank you for my label, Broken Bow, Country Radio, baby. What's up, dog? Oh, Republic, John Manili, we did it, baby. There was a time in my life, y'all, that I was broken. That's why I wrote this album. I didn't think I had a chance, y'all. There was days that I thought the darkest things. I was a horrible human. There was a moment in my life that all I had was a Bible this big and a radio the same size and a 6x8 foot cell. And I believed that those two things could change my life. I believed that music had the power to change my life and God had the power to change my life. And I want to tell y'all right now, Jesus is for everybody. Jesus is not owned by one political party. Jesus is not owned by no music label. Jesus is Jesus, and anybody can have a relationship with him. I love you, Lord.
So there you have it. A great message by Jelly Roll. And this was amid a lot of crazy things that were going on. And it's just one of the reasons why I don't ever watch these shows. But Justin Bieber, who at one point was claiming to be a Christian, came out in crystal covered underwear, apparently. Again, I have not laid my eyes on any of this, just reading the reports. But he was out there in this crystal covered underwear, apparently couldn't be bothered to put on clothes. Trevor Noah, who hosted this, he made jokes about Nicki Minaj and her recent public appearance with President Trump and other celebrities, including Justin Bieber's wife, Hailey Bieber, and Billie Eilish wore ice out pins in a protest against immigration enforcement. And artist Bad Bunny, this artist, quote unquote, who's going to be performing the halftime Super Bowl, he used multiple acceptance speeches to condemn ICE and called for unity while doing that and criticizing them on stage. So this is the backdrop of all of this going on. And then here comes Jelly Roll with those comments that you just heard. And now, normally I despise even talking about the Grammys. I don't even like to recognize that it exists. I mean, me personally, I have largely forgotten in my mind that this sort of award show even exists. This and the Oscars. If you're hoping for lots of news on those types of award shows, well, you're going to have to find it somewhere else because you are rarely, if ever, going to get that news here on this podcast. And I've said it before, but one of my proudest parent moments was when my then senior in high school daughter asked me what the Oscars was. Somebody must have brought it up. She had no clue because that's how little we pay attention to this stuff in our home here. But while Jelly Roll's awesome comments might not change my tune about wanting to cover these events, I'll tell you what it does remind me of. It reminds me not to give up on the lost. It reminds me of Isaiah 59:1, which is a verse that often comes to mind when I'm thinking about this. It says, "Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, or his ear dull that it cannot hear." And I remember this verse, honestly, because attending Matt Chandler's church when I was in Texas, he kind of made the joke about, you know, the visualization of this verse of how God doesn't have these tiny little T-Rex arms, you know, and you picture the T-Rex doesn't have. So anyway, that stuck with me, that little image. And so I remember this verse, and it's something to remember because no one is too lost for the Lord to save. And I think my heart probably has been hardened, if I'm being honest, a little bit towards people like this in the entertainment industry, just because of how hostile they are to God. So in music and Hollywood, these sorts of people, I've kind of written them off. But then I think of Isaiah 59:1. I think of Paul, the unlikeliest of champions for the gospel, from murdering and persecuting early followers of Christ to becoming the most prominent apostle in history, of course. So I think about those situations and how my finite mind can't grasp what God can do in the heart of an unbeliever. So while Jelly Roll's comments, they're not going to make me care about the Grammys all of a sudden, what I do care about is lost souls. And I'm reminded not to let my heart be hardened against certain groups. And yes, at some point we dust off our sandals, but not before you actually try. When we look at those verses from Matthew 10, when Jesus sends out the 12 apostles, he gives them instructions, sending out the 12 apostles. He does tell them at some point, if they don't receive you, shake off the dust from your feet. But the instruction right before that is to find whoever's worthy, stay there till you depart. You're bringing the word there. And if it's until they don't receive you, that then is when you dust off the sandals. So in our own lives, if we're bringing the gospel to somebody, you got to bring it to them first before you write them off. And I think sometimes we can get that backwards and we can write them off before we actually bring them the word. So food for thought here on this Monday edition of the Quick Start Podcast. And we're going to go to the main thing now. And as I mentioned at the top, President Trump is warning Canada to scrap a proposed electric vehicle trade deal with China or face a 100% tariff on Canadian goods entering the U.S. China analyst Gordon Chang says the threat is the right call, arguing cheap EVs could come with a hidden cost, data, and surveillance. Chang also points to a rapid purge of top Chinese generals, saying it's left Xi Jinping weakened in the PLA in disarray. CBN's Gary Lane sat down with Chang for the latest on all of this and more with China for today's main thing.
Trump is warning Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney that he'll impose a 100% tariff on Canadian goods if a trade deal with China moves forward. The deal would let China send 49,000 electric cars into Canada, facing only a 6% tariff. In a Truth Social post, Trump insisted Carney is sorely mistaken if he intends Canada to become, quote, a drop-off port for China to send goods and products into the United States. At the same time, reports say a top Chinese military leader has been ousted for taking bribes and passing nuclear secrets to the U.S. So what's really happening between Canada, China, and the Chinese military? Folks, it's something to watch closely. Here to explain is China analyst with the Gatestone Institute, Gordon Chang. His most recent book is Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon, first, explain this Canada trade agreement with China. It doesn't seem like it's beneficial to Canada, and there's even opposition from a number of Canadian leaders.
There are a number of voices in Canada, especially in Ottawa, with Doug Ford, the premier, who has been very critical of the deal even before it was announced. Because what Canada has done is basically pushed itself into third world status. Here you have China exporting advanced industrial products to Canada in the form of Chinese EVs. And Canada, what does it get? Well, it's selling basic agricultural commodities, canola. This typifies third world type behavior. And by the way, we're also subject to that because we sell soybeans. This is a criticism that is born from seeing this pattern elsewhere. But also with these Chinese EVs, they're going to decimate Canada's car market. If they allowed it into greater quantities. Also, there's an issue here, and that is the Biden administration in January of last year took a very important step. It essentially banned Chinese EVs from the U.S. because of their internet connections. Basically, they're rolling spy machines. Well, the Trump administration, at least preliminarily, has indicated that those Chinese EVs imported into Canada will not be able to come into the United States. And that, by the way, is the right thing for us to do, because why should we allow these rolling spy devices into the United States? So I'm glad the Trump administration has made that preliminary indication. And that means that Chinese EVs are going to be even less popular. Yeah, they'll be cheap, but who wants to drive in a car where Beijing is listening to everything that you say?
The Wall Street Journal reported the removal of top People's Liberation Army commander Jung Yu-sia for leaking nuclear weapons secrets to the U.S. So what does his dismissal and the firing of other PLA leaders mean for President Xi Jinping?
I think that Xi Jinping has lost a lot of control of the Chinese military. There have been purges after purges, especially over the last 2.5 years. And you see media reports saying Xi Jinping purged this general or that admiral. I'm not so sure, because when we look at evidence, it suggests that Xi Jinping's adversaries in the military are purging Xi Jinping's loyalists in the military. And that means Xi Jinping may not have the control of the military that people assume that he has. So this is a fluid situation. It changes, I'm sure, by the week. But the continuing purges indicates the Chinese military is in disarray. And by the way, that means it is in no condition to launch a combined air-land-sea operation to take the main island of Taiwan.
So perhaps no immediate threat to Taiwan right now, but how about in the future? Do the Chinese support a war with Taiwan?
A Chinese invasion of Taiwan would be extremely unpopular in the mainland. But a Chinese invasion of Japan might actually be quite popular. And Xi Jinping might see that as one way of preserving his rule, because I think he is being challenged. But he knows that if he creates a high degree of tension with any country, but especially Japan, that prevents other Communist Party figures from challenging him. So I think that he sees this as a way of preserving his legacy and his rule.
You mentioned Japan. Most of us would think a war over Taiwan would be more likely. Why would Xi Jinping risk war with Japan when the country's relationship with the United States has grown closer and stronger under President Trump?
Japan is always a flashpoint with regard to China, regardless of the attitude of Tokyo towards Washington. Because the Chinese are getting arrogant. We're starting to see propaganda types dehumanizing foreigners in general, and Japanese in particular. And that can't end well. We know that they've got conflicting territorial claims. Basically, China has baseless, from a legal point of view, baseless claims to the islands that the Chinese call the Diaoyus and the Japanese call the Senkakus in the East China Sea. And those islands are protected by the U.S.-Japan military treaty. So if China were to try to grab them, we would become involved in the defense of the Japanese homeland. This is a situation which is, I think, volatile.
Well, another development is also volatile for China. Its Bureau of National Statistics reports China's population fell by more than 3.3 million in 2025, and births plummeted to a record low, just under 8 million. How serious is this population plunge for China, Gordon?
China is on track to losing about 3/4 of its population between now and the turn of the century. So a country which is now, it says 1.4 billion, could end up being 450 million or so when the clock strikes 2100. You know, the range of estimates is 330 million to about 770 million. I think it's going to be at the lower end of the range for a number of reasons. But wherever it is, this is going to be the biggest demographic fall in history in the absence of war. Even the Black Death in Europe, the bubonic plague, only killed 1/3 of Europe's population. This is going to be much more than that. And it's not only demography, which is long-term, of course. It's the economy. China did not grow at the 5.0% pace that they reported for 2025. We don't know where it was. I don't think anybody in the world really knows. But it could very well have been an economy that was in contraction. So Xi Jinping has got to realize that the motor of China's rise has sputtered out.
All right, appreciate that conversation there. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing. We're going to take a look at 1 Peter 2:12. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. This is a convicting verse. You think about all these people being mentioned in the Epstein files. A lot of them probably didn't really do anything illegal, maybe not even anything immoral, possibly. But because of the association, maybe using a lack of judgment and just who they're associating with, now they're getting caught up in this. So it's a reminder to us that we need to keep our actions above reproach as best we can so that we honor and glorify the name of Christ with our lives. So a challenging one for sure in all of our walks of life. And so praying for each and every one of us as we go forward, trying to do that in our fallen state. So that's where we're going to leave it on today's podcast. As always, get yourself on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. God bless. See you back here tomorrow.